What lens should I get? This is a question that we get on almost every video when we talk about camera gear. So today I'm going to try to answer it. Stick around. So if you saw the thumbnail to this video, it's a collection of my full frame lenses that I use on my Nikon D750. And we've been doing a lot of reviews on the Canon M50, and Eric's talking about the EOS R. And a lot of the questions we get in comments and private messages and things, they're all, what lens would work best with this? What should I get with this? So a lot of people are getting the kit lenses that come with their cameras. So what's a kit lens? This is a kit lens. This came with my Nikon D7000. Now when I bought my D750, it only came with just the body. So I already had lenses. I didn't buy a lens that came with it. But typically the better your camera is, the better the kit lens that's going to come with it is going to be. So the D7000 was a mid-level, crop sensor camera. It was okay. So it had this lens with it. This is an 18 to 140 f3.5 to f5.6. And it's a decent lens. It's got a nice focal range. It's roughly 24 to 210, so it covers a huge amount of area, and it's a decent lens. It's nothing special. You're not going to get crazy shallow depth of field. It's good focusing. It's just a good walk-around lens, and it's made for a crop sensor camera. Why would you not just be happy with this? Because typically you want to get a little more creative with your images. You want to create shallow depth of field. You want sharper images. Maybe you want a different focal length. Maybe you want a more specialized focal length. So when people ask me, what lens should I get? It's a hard question to answer. So I'm going to go through my lenses and talk about why I bought each one, and maybe it'll give you some insight into why you would want to buy a certain lens. I'm going to start with this lens, which is a 24 to 70, and we've talked about this, and there's a review on the channel about this lens. I bought this lens as a workhorse, do everything, gotta have it in my bag kind of lens. This lens will be on my camera most times. When I'm shooting, maybe I'm shooting a party or an event, or I'm doing some work for, I was doing some work for some campgrounds. This lens almost never came off the camera. It's a great lens when you're shooting people. It's fast focusing, has stabilization built in. So this is a really nice focal length to have in your bag, and it's a 2.8 aperture lens. This is a lens I think every photographer should own. No matter what camera system you're using, it doesn't matter. This focal length is made for every camera. So if you have an APS-C size sensor, you would get this version of it. This is a 17 to 50, which is basically the exact same lens. It's a 2.8 aperture, but this is made for a crop sensor camera. Now the camera I'm shooting on right now, my M50, has a 15 to 45, which is also roughly the same focal length. But that one is not a 2.8. It's a kit lens, and it's not as good as these two are. These are both 2.8 lenses, and these will give you a nice image. This is going to look better on a full frame camera. The depth of field is going to be more shallow. But this focal length is a really great focal length to have. The new version of this lens is $1,000. This is a $400 or $500 lens. So as you get into full frame lenses, everything gets more expensive. 70 to 200. This is a lens that I think is invaluable. If you shoot portraits, if you're, just in general, this is what, aside from the 24 to 70, this is probably my second most used lenses. And those two lenses together can cover just about any kind of situation. Like Eric just said in his video the other day, he was out with his 24 to 70 and his 70 to 200 because they can do just about anything together. This is a lens I would have with any camera. I would use this on my M50. I would use this on a crop sensor camera. I would use this with my full frame camera. This is a sharp, fast focusing, beautiful depth of field, great for portraits. These lenses tend to be expensive, but once you buy one of these, you'll have it for probably as long as you shoot or you're into photography. Like, I don't see this lens ever giving me a problem. I've had it for 5 or 6 years now. There's nothing wrong with it. It just keeps working. This is a lens I'll never get rid of. I will always have one of these. I just sold my 50mm Sigma 1.4 because I wasn't using it. When I was in a situation where I was shooting portraits or people, I would just always go to this, and that sat in my bag, and I never used it. So I got rid of it, and I used the money for some other gear. Maybe you bought your first camera and you want to be a landscape shooter. You're into shooting landscapes, skylines, mountain ranges, maybe you live by the beach, whatever it is, and you just want to do that landscape shooting, I would go with a wide angle lens. Now, depending on what kind of camera system you have. So I have a Nikon 16 to 35 f4. And here's another thing with landscape lenses. Don't worry about the aperture so much, because I almost never shoot this at f4. I shoot this at f9, f11, f13, f15. So the shallow depth of field to me in this lens does not matter. Whereas the 2.8 in my 24 to 70 is absolutely invaluable, and I use it all of the time. So similar price points, similar size. Don't care about the aperture in this one. Absolutely imperative in this one. You have to know what you're going to be using lenses for. Now, I can use the 24 to 70 as a landscape lens, but when you start getting to 16 millimeters, 14 millimeters, the look is just a better look. It's a wider look. It's a more impressive look. And this lens can just about do everything. And the reason why I use this one is because it has filter threads on it. And when I'm shooting waterfalls during the day, or I want to create some movement in the sky by doing long exposures, I want to use ND filters with this. And with filter threads, I'm able to do that. So here's the crop sensor, or APS-C version of that lens. This is a 16 to 35. This is an 11 to 16. And this is a very good Tokina lens, fairly inexpensive. I use this with my M50, and I could put this on if like I had a Canon T series, a Rebel series, so those type of cameras, the crop sensor cameras from Canon. And they make this in all different mounts, so you can get it for different camera systems. This is a nice lens. It's sharp, it's sturdy, it feels heavy. This is my landscape lens when I'm using a crop sensor camera like the M50. And so this is a very nice lens also. So you're going to want something that's going to give you a nice wide focal range if you're into landscapes. So those two lenses are great for that. Right now I have two prime lenses, but I really don't use my 135 too much. That's a very specialized lens. It's manual focus. I have used it in certain situations and the images are spectacular, but it's not easy to use. It's one of those lenses where you have to really sit and think. So there are times when I will take it out, but I always keep this little one in my bag. It's a 35 millimeter f2, and this is a good lens to have. So if you have the kit lens for whatever system you have, and you're looking for that second lens, you might want to have one of these. I don't use it too often. I actually use my zoom lenses almost exclusively. But if I'm like with the family and I want to take my Nikon with me and I don't want to have a big heavy setup with me, the 24 to 70 compared to this, it's a big difference. So this is a nice small little lens, and I put this on the camera and it's great, and I go. But now that I have the M50, I haven't really been using my Nikon that way. So what I'll do is I will take the 22 millimeter f2 lens that I have for my M50 and just take the M50 and throw it in my wife's bag or in a jacket pocket, and I'll use that when I'm just knocking around with the family. So that 35 millimeter is being used less and less in my bag also. So this is a specialized lens. This is a fisheye, and this is one of those lenses that in the right situation can create some amazingly unique and fun images. And this is a lens I will never ever get rid of, or I will always have a version of this in my bag. I don't use it all the time, but when I do use it, it's given me some really spectacular images. It's inexpensive. This lens is, I think now you can get them under $200 maybe. They're very inexpensive. It's manual focus, but it doesn't matter because it's so wide that everything's in focus. And it's just a cool lens to have. It's a fun lens to use. So when you ask, what lens should I get? It really depends on you and what you're going to be doing with it. I think everybody should have that 24 to 70 in their bag. Now, if Eric was sitting here, he would say something completely different. I'm almost sure of it. So look who showed up over here. So I've been talking about my gear and why I buy the lenses I do and how I use them and everything. So Eric actually showed up here because we're working on something together. And so I asked him the question. When we get this question all the time. So, when somebody says, what lens should I buy? It's a very wide open question. So what would you say?
I always recommend, anytime somebody's especially starting out and building their kit and getting their lenses together, a nice wide prime lens. 100% of the time, you definitely need one of those. It'll actually change the way you shoot. Zoom lenses are great. We talk about them all the time. You really need to have that focal length covered, especially in certain situations where you can't miss a shot. You need to be able to change focal lengths quickly. But having a really wide prime lens, like a 50mm 1.8, or if you're shooting on a crop sensor, something like a 35mm 2.0, relatively inexpensive, like $100 for the 50, a couple $100 for a 35, is invaluable, I think, to your photography. It takes you outside of the normal. It takes you outside of that, that 2.8 to 4.0 aperture range, and lets you really change the way you shoot. And being locked in at one focal length will actually change the way you shoot also, because you can't just zoom in and out. You have to actually walk around, basically zoom with your feet and recompose. I've gone out sometimes, I spent a whole day sometimes in the Disney parks with one prime lens on there, and the kind of photographs I get in a day like that are, different.
Right. But now I've been talking about zoom lenses here
Right.
all afternoon because
Right.
that's what I am more comfortable with, and I actually just sold my 50mm lens. So right now I don't even own. I own. When I look at this pile of lenses that's in front of me right here, I'm looking at all of them here. For my full frame Nikon, I own one prime lens, and it's a 35mm f2, and everything else are zoom lenses, and that's me. So when you're asking that question of yourself, which lens should I buy? You're going to get two completely different opinions from two photographers here. So you really have to decide on what you are going to be shooting. And like I was saying earlier in the video, if you're going to be shooting landscapes, then a 16 to 35, something like that, that's a lens that you might want to have, or maybe a 14mm prime,
Right.
But you kind of have to know what you want to shoot, and you also have to have your budget really kind of locked in with this stuff.
Right, yes. Get the 50mm, get it for $100, have it in your bag, and just use it. Whenever you're out shooting, attach that lens to your camera and get some shots with it just to kind of get a feel for it. The zoom lenses are invaluable. We've talked about that before. You really need the versatility of the zoom lenses.
Right now, you were out shooting a parade last weekend.
Right.
And what did you have with you?
I had the 24 to 70
two
2.8,
zoom lenses.
and the
You had
70
the
to 200.
70 to 200.
Between those two lenses, that covered everything.
Right.
It was the parade only lasted 15 minutes. I had to basically shoot the whole entire thing while I was walking along backwards
time.
with the parade.
Yeah.
There's no time to fumble around with prime lenses and selecting your focal length. You got to get the shots. You got to be able to switch your focal length really quickly. But when you can slow down and when you're on a
More
tripod,
creative. I think that's what it is.
Yeah,
Prime
that's
lenses
really
let
what
you
it
be
is.
really creative, and they're for when you're like messing around and trying to try different things, and you're trying to get really cool looks and things like that. But when you need to knock out some bunch of shots quickly,
Right.
that's when the zoom lenses come in handy.
Right.
So
And typically, the zoom lenses are better as far as focusing goes. They're always hitting the mark focusing. The prime lenses aren't quite as perfect focusing. That's why it kind of slows you down a little bit.
yeah. So all right. So there's Eric's opinion on that. I told you he was going to say something different than what I said. He is a prime shooter. That's what he prefers, and he likes the creative images that those lenses give him. And I find that I can get images that I'm pretty happy with all my zoom lenses, and I don't have to worry about changing lenses out. If you ever shot with Eric, you would see he's constantly in and out of his bag, changing lenses on his camera and everything. And sometimes I just don't. It's a bit of a pain to do that. So I tend to enjoy my zoom lenses. This card is going to be the review I did of the 24 to 70 Tamron that I use all the time, that I think is my most versatile lens. It's the one I think everybody should have. So you could look at that one. And this one is going to be Eric's video about prime lenses and why he uses them. Okay, see you in the next one.